G'day fellow flight simmers and random YouTubers. Today I want to do a video or an update to a video that I did about 4 years ago, and it's about IFR flight planning in Australia. It's essential that you flight plan properly, A, because it makes your job of flying easier, and B, it makes the transition in from, or should I say, selection of SIDS and stars a lot more easier if you flight plan properly. So let's jump straight into it. Where's the first place you would look at to flight plan? Well, the first place I'd recommend would be trying to look for real flight plans, and where you go for that would be a place called Flight Aware, and you're presented with this. And this site gives you real world flight plans. And if you go to live flight tracking and you go down here to IFR route analyzer, and we'll go from Melbourne to this is a very, very popular route, and you find the route there, and it spits this information down here. And you can see that the most common frequency, or the most common route, was going along this particular route here. It's going direct Melbourne H129 Docile, and I'll explain all that. And you can see the different aircraft that have flown this particular route. Okay, so and the beauty of this is that if I click on this link here, it jumps straight to a place called Sky Vector, and it shows you basically in a pictorial form which way you're heading. Now, also, this particular site is useful because when you're flight planning, there's three things you need to look at. And the first one, and it tells you actually right here what actually you should look for when you flight planning. The first one is to note the altitude. And what does that mean? Note the altitude. Yeah, okay, I want to fly from Melbourne to Sydney. I want to go at flight level 280. Can I do that? Well, unfortunately, you can't, because ICAO has brought out these rules where the levels you can fly and you can't fly. Now, if you're flying on a magnetic heading of between 0 and 179 inclusive on a magnetic track above 3,000, which we will be doing, you've got to go odd numbers. In other words, 579, flight level 310, 330, etc., etc. So you can see all these altitudes by these aircraft here, we're all flying at odd numbers going to Sydney. Okay, and the same if you're flying basically this is in an easterly direction. If you're flying from in a westerly direction, i.e. Melbourne to Adelaide or Melbourne to Perth, you're flying at even numbers. So that's the first thing you need to be aware of. The second is the type of aircraft. I'll get back to that later on because there's another thing. And also to verify the terminal procedures that are eligible for SID and stars. Okay, so what does that mean? Well, if we go back here and we zoom in, and you take off from Melbourne and you get to this waypoint called Docile. Okay, so what that means is you need to find a SID that links you up to this first waypoint called Docile. Now, if I go to a place called Aeronautical Information, Air Service Australia, you get to this site, I'll link a description, provide a link in the descriptions down below, and you click agree, and you click on departure and approach procedures. Now, be aware, I'm making this on the 18th of May. I'm making this, so in 3 days' time, if you're watching this in 3 days' time, you need to obviously look at that. So if I link that, and I find this, and I go to aerodrome procedure charts, and here we are. We've got all the aerodromes for Australia, and if I click M, it brings me down to Melbourne, and these are all the charts that are applicable to Melbourne. And so we basically want, for Melbourne, we want a SID that connects us up to Docell. So where do we go? So we look at here, we look at SID Melbourne 5 departures. That's a radar departure. In other words, it requires vectoring by the approach controller. But if we look at this one, SIDS, northeast jets. Okay. And be aware of, this is very important. This is applicable for jets only. So if you read that, runways northeast jets. And if you look down here, we've got the Docell 1 departure for all runways. Runway 16, 27, 34. Sorry, not all runways. For 09 is not applicable. So we can safely say that that fits in nicely. The Docell 1 departure fits in nicely for that part of the flight plan. Okay, and now if you have a look at here, is it eligible? Well, we found that the first part of the flight plan is eligible for the SID. What about the second one, the STAR? Well, if you go to here, and one of the waypoints on the way is a place called Rivet. Okay. And if you go back to the charts here and you go to Sydney, and you look through all the star charts, you'll see there's the Rivet, and it gives you the Rivet 3 arrival to runway 07. I'll just enlarge that. 16 left, right, 34 left and right. So that, when you look at that, you say that's a valid flight plan. Okay, I'm flying a jet, which is okay, it's applicable for this particular route. I'm flying at the proper level, in this case 270 that particular day, but it can be 330, 310. And it fits in with an appropriate star because Rivet is on that. Okay, so now the question I bet everyone's asking, okay, what happens if I want to fly that from A to B and it's not on flight aware? Well, I'm glad you asked, because if we go back to the AIP, click agree, and click on the en route SUP here. It's called URSA en route SUP. Once again, 27th of February, but if you guys are watching it 3 days later, click on that. And I get a list of all these wonderful bits of information, including IFR waypoints, VFR waypoints. I'll do a video on that in coming weeks as part of the VFR flight planning. But today we're only worried about IFR flight planning. And you look here, it says General FPR Flight Plan Requirements. And it opens up this wonderful document. And you can see, and it's divided up into sections, like the first section is about New South Wales and all the different applicable. For example, if you go from Richmond to Acmere, not to be flight planned above 8,000. And there's reasons for that. And I've said many, many times in other videos, flight simming is you can make it real as you want, or you can just do what you want. It's up to you what sort of reality or level of reality you want to bring into it. So you can have a look. Now, for example, if you're departing Sydney in a jet and you're going south and you're landing in Canberra, you have to file via Wollongong. I know this is all things that you get to understand as you gain more experience. And the H65 is, and you can see here, there's the H65. So if you're going via Canberra, if you're leaving Sydney, you're going via Canberra, you go H65, and you go via that way, Razzie, etc., etc. gives you a wealth of information, and Sydney departures if you're a non-jet. And once again, like I showed you before, flight planning, consideration to flight planning is the type of aircraft, and I'll talk more about that. So that's the type of aircraft, and you can see quite clearly here, if you're on jet departures, your departures from Sydney are very different than than a jet. Okay, but what I really want to show you, if you go down to page 20, and you can see there's a wealth of flight plans here, and this may look a bit intimidating, and it's only through experience, but you know, for example, that one there is Ayers Rock to Perth, and you fly that way. Now you fly this particular flight plan. Now I want you to take notice. This is basically the Bible of flight planning. In other words, what I mean by that is this is exactly the way you set it out. In other words, DCT means direct, AYE, Q41, Hamilton, and that's a VOR, and then Q148, Perth, direct. When you're flight planning, you put it in this exact format. You don't put your SID or your star in it like America. You leave it as is. You, as the pilot, then obviously can put into your FMC what SID or star it is, but you put it in this exact format. The air traffic control, if you're flying online, the air traffic controller will then annotate a SID or an appropriate SID or star. But you, as the pilot, you put it in this format. Okay, so that's very, very important. You don't do it like the Americans do. That's the first thing I want you to note. Okay, so as you may recall, I talked about the type of aircraft, or as quite rightly, a consideration is the type of aircraft. Now, if you have a look here, YBAS to YBBN, we'll go back here and we'll look for YBAS, which is Alice Springs, and we want to go to Brisbane on this particular day, and we want to find and surprise, surprise, it's not there. However, you can see it provides you with a flight plan should you want to go from Alice Springs. Now, what I want you to notice, you've got these little markers here, okay? This percentage, if you read up the top here, it says percentage indicates the route for jet aircraft only, in other words, Queensland and Western Australia. So this particular flight plan is only if you're flying a jet. And this greater than symbol, if you look here, indicates an alternate route for non-jet aircraft. And this is that particular way. So you've got to be mindful of that. Now, what I'll do here is I'll put this into, what I've got to show you now is, let's say, for example, we'll get rid of this, and it's always best to check in Sky Vector to give you a pictorial indication. That way you become a lot more aware. Okay, so now for, you can see that DCT AS, which is the Alice Springs VOR, and then T11, and then ROM, which is, I know that's Roma. Now we're flying, also when you're plotting this out on Sky Vector, you've got to be aware that you're flying a jet. More likely than not, you're flying above flight level 180. And by the way, that's what this basically indicates. World high charts is anything above flight 180. World low charts is below 180, okay? So we said that Alice Springs, T11 and Roma, okay. Alice Springs, T11, and it's actually filtered out to Roma. and there's Aroma NDB. And then we'll go Y195 to the Brisbane VOR. So you can see Y195, which is, I'm just grabbing this with my left mouse button. And this is actually where it joins up. So you can see that this is the Y195. Okay, so quite like you say, the flight plan says Y195, so you've got to stay on that airway. Okay, so I'm flying on the 195, and now SkyVector gives you a habit. See how that's coloured brown? That means it's a star. Now that SkyVector doesn't get it always right, so be mindful of that. So I tend to sort of check it myself, and we'll just stick with Glenn, because then we'll work out the star from there. Okay, because like I said before, we have to look to see if it's eligible for a star routing. Okay, so does it fit that criteria? So does this flight plan that we've set up gives us a proper star? Okay, so let's go to Brisbane for the charts for Brisbane. So let's go up here to Brizzy. Now, we saw on Flight Vector, it gave us the Sync 1 arrival. Okay? And like I said, it gets it right sometimes, but not all the time. Let's have a look in this case. See if it and what do you know? We can see from this chart that the Sync 1 arrival starts from a waypoint Glen, which is exactly where we've flight planned. And it follows these waypoints and it finishes up at Sync. And then from Sync, you can see, if you read down here, it sets us up for either the ILS, the RNAV, or localize or VR approach. So this flight plan is a valid flight plan. In other words, it makes our life easier. We don't have to check any further than that, because we've satisfied the SID and we've satisfied the star requirements as per this. Okay, so what happens if maybe, or this doesn't get it right, or you want to double check? Well, there's a site called VATPAC, and once again I'll put a link in the description. And if you go to AT Assist and you type in, and you want to know what star, let's say for example, SkyVector didn't get it right, and we want to go, and we know that we planned, these are all the waypoints, or sorry, the airways, and these are all the waypoints, okay, as you can see here. And we went to Glen, and up here you can see the star, and this particular star is applicable both to props and jets, because the B indicates both. It's not a radar. N means it's a non-radar star. Well, actually, it's a bit that's not really right, but anyhow. So the Sync 1 is the applicable star for Brisbane, and you see it's a Sync and the Glen transition. So if we go back to, you can see it's a Sync with the Glen transition. So that's where it satisfies our requirements perfectly. Okay. Now if we go back to the URSA, we can see for a non-jet, it's a completely, well, not completely different. It just follows from Rome. It goes the Y79 to Brisbane. Okay, so if we go Y79, I guarantee it's probably... And you can see there's quite a difference. For a non-jet, you're coming in and you're coming into here. So you think, well, what star do I need to, if I'm a non-jet? So let's get rid of that. You can see that there's a waypoint here called Kevi. Okay, so let's see if you can see here there's the Kevi waypoint. So if I click that, and the star for that is the Kevi 5 Alpha. Okay, so if we go back to Brizzy and we see that one there, we click there, we can see that the Kevi 5 Alpha gets us onto runway 01 right, 14, 19, 32. So in other words, it gets us onto 19, which is via sync, and then it's the ILS, or it gets us to Glen, which is the ILS for runway 01 right. And by the way, Brizzy's going to have 2 parallel runways in the future. And it gets us to Kevi, which is, it gets us to Ramon for the runway 14. Okay, so you can see that this particular route fits in beautifully in getting us the right star. And like I say, make this your friend to work out what stars and SID. If somebody's online, it's more often than not, they'll give you the star and you don't have to worry about it. But more often than not, you're probably actually flying offline, so you need to work out the SID and star for yourself. And this is all part of the planning, okay? Because once you know which SIDs and stars, now the fact of the matter is, this is important obviously to put in the information FMC. However, be aware that when you're submitting your flight plan, whether it's using vPilot or something else, this is the actual format. Once again, you do not put the SID or stars in. This is the exact format you put it in. I think that's about it, really. I've been going on for about 25 minutes. If there's any questions, put them in the comments below. And till next time, happy flight simming. See you all later. Cheers.